Good evening. I want to thank Ashbury for permitting me to be part of today's TEDxAshbury presentation. Very honored to be here. Today's presentation is focused on the youth here in this audience, which I'll explain in terms of my title, Why Not Asia? For you high school students, you are on the cusp of deciding, if you haven't already, your post-secondary choice of location. You're also on the cusp of deciding what is your career path. There are a number of criteria that one is going to choose in terms of deciding where you want to study and what you want to do in your life. The purpose of today's presentation is to put one additional criteria there from a geographical vantage point, and that is, why not Asia as a factor in those choices? So I'll talk about why Asia matters, how it's going to be a driver whether you realize it or not in your life, how it concerns you as a Canadian citizen, and how it matters to you individually. So if you want to be in the space where the money is, Asia is where it's at. Why? Half of the world's middle class is there. It's also increasingly the driver of the world's GDP growth, home of a number of startups, or the unicorns. Those are startups worth over $1 billion. It's the home of the majority of global FDI flows, foreign direct investment. And then from an innovation perspective, while we all think Silicon Valley where it's at, did you know that the top 4 out of those 5 innovation clusters are in Asia? Tokyo, Yokohama, Beijing, Seoul, Shenzhen, Hong Kong. In fact, people say that the next innovation success will come more out of Shenzhen than it will out of Silicon Valley. Now, I did say that's where the money is, but I didn't say it's not without its challenges. 40% of the world's poor lies in Asia. 1.2 billion people still are below the poverty line of $3.20 a day. It has significant gender inequity. It's 1 out of 3 women indicate that they are subject to physical or sexual violence from their intimate partner. It's also at the forefront of climate change, which was a topic earlier today. When we think about the rising sea levels, the South Pacific Islands, the archipelago of Philippines and Indonesia are at the forefront of their very existence. But they're also the source of the problem and the potential solution. Why? Because the largest gross emitters, number 1 and number 3, India and China, are there. And the 3rd largest emitter on a per capita basis, Australia, is also there. So if we're going to come to a solution for globally, it's got to come in Asia. It's also a place whereby there is a rise of authoritarianism, an increasing lack of media freedom, and unfortunately a shrinking civil society space. And out of the top 15 spenders, unfortunately, of significant military spending, 5 of the 15 reside in Asia. It's also, when you look at the global conflict tracker, 7 out of the 25 reside in Asia, where there's the nuclear crisis in North Korea, it is the Jammu crisis in India, the South China Sea conflict, the Rohingyas that have been displaced in Burma, from Burma, the list goes on. It's also a place whereby We need to get a handle. Opioid crisis, where's the source? It comes from Asia over to North America. Our pork prices are going to rise given the African swine flu that is devastating the livestock in Asia. And of course, polio is still rampant. It has not gone away in places such as Afghanistan and Pakistan. And if we don't get a handle on pandemics, climate change in Asia, then it is going to ricochet and it's going to come over to our shores. The dynamics that are going on in Asia is in fact impacting us now. The trade war, the so-called trade war between China and the US, it's displacing foreign direct inflows, it's disrupting global supply chains. Canada is going through its own challenging diplomatic tensions with China, as some of you may know. And of course, we are heavily influenced in terms of the multicultural element of our society with an increasing Asian diaspora. 1.8 million Canadian Chinese, 1.4 million Indian Canadians, 800,000 Filipino Canadians, and those numbers will increase, and they will have views and will influence Canada's foreign policy engagement going forward. So as I said at the beginning, as you contemplate your education choices, as you contemplate your career choices, and you think about what's going to drive your life, the purpose of today's presentation is to simply remind you that Asia will directly and indirectly will influence you. And so the question before you is, why not factor Asia in your choices in order to take advantage of it? And so, from an education perspective, we think here in Canada that we have some of the best universities in the world, and that's very true. And so Canadian high school students will naturally think about going to a Canadian university. They may think broader than that, or may think about some of the universities down south. But I will ask you to think about an Asian university, because some of the top universities are also in Asia. I think about in Beijing, Tsinghua University, Peking University. I think about the National University of Singapore. I think about Kyoto University in Japan, and in India, the Indian Institute of Science or the Indian Institute of Technology as potential places for you to consider. Canada is blessed from a language perspective in fostering bilingualism in English and French. But why not consider leveraging the rise of Asia and thinking about an Asian language? Already, at least 1.3 billion people in this world speak Mandarin. 650-odd million people speak Hindi. Imagine your ability to be an influencer in the world ahead if you're able to speak a language. 199 million people speak Indonesian. 128 million people speak Japanese. Your influence and your ability to drive the change that others have advocated that you may be will be enhanced even further if you're able to connect with people at the language level. I talked earlier about both where the money is, I talked about its development challenges, I've talked about the environmental issues, and I've talked about political and the security dynamics in that region. So as you think about your career choices and why not Asia, factor some of that in your career paths. Obviously, banking and entrepreneurialism is ripe for that region. But if you're interested in international development, it's a place to be, given the development challenges I talked about. If you're into human rights or in the foreign, if you want to be in the foreign service, well, it's an exotic place in order to do diplomacy. And obviously, if you want to pursue a military or security path, well, given those security dynamics that I cited earlier, it's going to be a place that you're going to engage with going forward. So besides the education, besides the career paths, there's always the competencies beyond language that you will need to think about if you want to connect with Asia and take advantage of its rise and mitigate its challenges, right? So a cultural ability to appreciate, engage in terms of different cultures, customs, and practices, a passion for travel, an ability to network are things that you should hone. So as I conclude, I just want you to think about why not Asia for your life choices ahead. As I read it earlier, for those factors I talked about earlier, it's going to be part of your life ahead, whether you like it or not. So how do you leverage your choices going forward for your benefit going forward? Thank you very much.